Good morning. When I first met Bill Bidwill, I was a raw 20-year-old kid from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who had just been drafted by the Cardinals. And that raw rookie could have never imagined that he would someday have the distinct honor of paying tribute to the man who gave him the opportunity of a lifetime. 16 years later, it's an extraordinary honor to say a few words about Mr. B on behalf of the thousands of players who have worn a Cardinals uniform during the 8 decades he was associated with the team. Men like Roger Goodell, Aeneas Williams, Kurt Warner, Adrian Wilson, and Roy Green, and so many of my teammates and coaches who took the time to be here today. I'd also like to make mention of the toughest Cardinal of them all, Larry Wilson, who wanted to be here today but is unable. He dedicated 40-plus years as a player and as a member of the front office, and I know his heart goes out to the Bidwill family. Those gathered here physically and in spirit speaks volumes about the impact Mr. B had on those of us who've had the privilege to represent him and the Cardinals. I know there are many players over the past few years that didn't have the privilege of getting to know Mr. B, and I regret that. You guys really missed out. Commissioner Goodell spoke a little bit about Mr. B's long history of embracing diversity, but I think it's worthy of repeating, and it's one of the values that had such an impact on so many lives, including mine, because in 2019, it is trendy and fashionable to talk about inclusion and the importance of gender and racial equality. But as evidenced by the signature bow tie that so many of us are wearing here today, Mr. B never had much interest in being trendy or fashionable. Decades ago, when he hired the late Adele Harris and the late Dennis Green, when he hired Bob Wallace and Rod Graves, both of who are here today, he wasn't seeking approval or recognition. It was not common or fashionable. He did it because they were capable and qualified women and men. He did it because it was the right thing to do. Make no mistake about it, I'm sure he took his fair share of criticism, both publicly and privately, for doing what his heart told him was right. But that was the type of man Mr. B was. He lived by his heart, not by the trend of today. He took the same approach to his many charitable works. Like the proud Jesuit he was, he lived by the creed, service to others. And perhaps a higher priority was doing it discreetly. Again, not seeking approval or recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. As I look around this beautiful church this morning, I thought about the countless masses Mr. B had attended his entire life. As most of you know, he would go to Mass all the time, but he didn't necessarily want to go for a long time. In fact, if Mr. B had any advice for me this morning, it would be, move it along, Fitz. Show me that clock management. So I'll be mindful of that this morning. By the way, it feels really good to hear a little laughter in the church because Mr. B loved that too. As we know, he loved to share a funny story, a good joke, and yes, for those that know him, a few bad ones as well. He was telling dad jokes well before we knew what dad jokes were. But what he was serious about was his family and his total love and devotion to them, to his wife, Nancy, of 56 years, and of course, to his 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. This week, I've had the privilege of seeing so many unbelievable photos of Mr. B throughout the years. As a ball boy in the locker room with the 1947 champions, Chicago Cardinals, as a young man toting the rock at Georgetown Prep, the smile in his face holding that Hallis trophy after we beat the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. But my favorite photos were the ones I saw at the house the ones where he was clearly the most happy and full of joy. They're the ones with his wonderful family. To Bill Jr., to Michael, Nicole, Patrick, and Tim, thank you so much for sharing your father with us. Thank you. And others have pointed out Mr. B's love for history. He loved sharing moments of history, and in particular, ones that were meaningful and intriguing to him. So here's one in his honor. The first game the Cardinals played after Mr. B's dad, Charles, officially purchased the team was in Cincinnati on October 8th, 1933. Exactly 86 years ago today. The Cardinals beat Cincinnati on that day, 3-0. Last Sunday was the first game the Cardinals have played without Mr. B, and we beat Cincinnati. And the margin of victory was that same 3 points. Somebody upstairs may have something to do with that. So yes, games go on, life continues, and history marches forward. But for what Mr. B meant to the National Football League, the Cardinals, this community, and a young 20-year-old kid from Minneapolis, Minnesota will endure forever. Rest in peace, Mr. B.
Thank you for all being here today. My father was kind, generous, loyal, and had a unique yet enduring sense of humor. Unexpectedly, in 1947, his father died. His mother, suddenly in charge of several businesses, including the Cardinals. It was decided that my father would go to boarding school. Dad's older brother, Stormy, was at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And historically connected to Georgetown, and a short drive up Wisconsin Avenue is a school called Georgetown Preparatory School. It's an all-boys school and the only Jesuit high school in the United States with a residential program. Day students from the area also attend prep. It made perfect sense for him to attend there. Prep is a special place. It has a beautiful 100-acre campus with rolling hills, 100-year-old oak trees, and it also includes a 9-hole golf course. It is home for the boarders. It became his home. Prep teaches their students to be men for others. For my father, his time at Prep embedded a roadmap of values that he used to live his life by. He developed deep, lifelong friendships, though he was among the last living members of his class. He loved Prep. His faith was anchored during his time there. Prep taught him to be a man for others. It taught him to give back, especially to the underprivileged and disadvantaged. It taught him to be kind and generous with his time and treasures. He learned to do the right thing, be forgiving, and remain humble. Decades after he was there, I would follow his path to Prep, as well as my brothers Patrick and Timothy behind me. He was immensely proud that we all shared that same experience and played football on the same field. Dad was a far better and far tougher football player than we were. He played with a leather helmet. Because of the NFL strike in 1982, Dad was free to make the trek to D.C. often. Bill Jr. was at Georgetown, and I was at Prep. He would take us to dinner and come watch my games. He made every game because he didn't want to miss a single snap when I got a chance to play. Over the years, if he was ever short on a story to tell, he would probably point at me and tell me they were looking at 2 generations of Bidwills who had scored touchdowns on Sidwell Friends, a rival school of Prep. I got to know his friends because they sent their boys to Prep too. I learned a lot about my father from his friends. I learned that he was the leading scorer on his football team and an amazing 2-sport athlete. I learned that he was a good student. I learned that he was a loyal friend and well-liked. And I learned that he drove his mother's 1948 powder blue Cadillac across Prep's golf course. So when he would bring up those touchdowns versus Sidwell Friends, I would add that there were also 2 generations of Bidwills who had driven across the Prep's golf course. He would snap a look at me with that twinkle in his eye and that little smile and tell me, "You can't prove that." Sorry about the golf course, Father. And James, let's not make it 3 generations. If you go to prep, they built a fence around the school so you can no longer take a shortcut to avoid traffic at the main gate. My younger siblings and I would be back to attend school in Washington. He would continue to travel to see us all the time. He missed us and wanted to spend time with us. After a particularly hard mini 6-week semester at Marymount University when she was working on her MBA, Nicole was exasperated and planned to drive straight home for the remainder of the summer. Her car was packed so she could leave immediately after her last exam. As she walked to her car, she was surprised to see Dad standing there with a suitcase and a Diet Coke for her. He drove the car while she slept, and she was delighted that he drove straight to training camp so that they could be with the team for a few days. In the fall of 1987, he made many trips to D.C. It seemed like every Thursday we ate at Duke Zebert's, a favorite K Street restaurant. He would speak with Nicole, Timothy, and me about the various cities who were courting him to move the Cardinals. I was in law school. Timothy was a junior at prep at the time. He'd also talk to us about the history of the team and about his early years in Chicago. 2 days after Christmas in 1987, we had a family meeting in our living room in St. Louis. The history books tell you that he made the decision to move the team to Arizona. Actually, that day, he told us it was going to be a family decision. He knew we would all be leaving friends behind and that it was daunting to think about moving to a new city and starting over. He didn't want to move us unless we wanted to move. It turned out to be a unanimous family decision to relocate to Arizona. He told us all, "We're not looking back." He trusted us to keep it a secret, which we did. 3 weeks later, he made the announcement. He gave great advice around key decisions we made in our lives. Normally, his advice would come in 90-second discussions. "One of you kids needs to go to law school," was the wisdom he focused me on my senior year of college. "Don't look back," was once again his advice when I told him I was going to leave the Justice Department. He encouraged Timothy to choose Santa Clara, another Jesuit university, when the alternative was a party school. He would say, "Don't grow a pearl over it any time any of us would be upset about something unimportant. Be nice to people, be a gentleman, and my absolute favorite, the best revenge is living well." His advice was always calming and reassuring. As you know, Dad also had an amazing ability to let things roll off his back. I never heard him utter a hateful word towards anyone, even though he had plenty of people throughout his life who had wronged him. You heard the commissioner speak about the glowing article on what Dad did for St. Peter Indian Mission School. I saw that article and knew he wouldn't be happy about it. He liked helping people, but believed charitable giving was about funding a need, not about getting credit. He wasn't mad at you, Sister Martha, but I think you know this. He did refer to you as Sister Blabbermouth for about the next year. His second family was the team, the staff, the players, the coaches, the alumni. He loved coming to the office and visiting with everyone. New staff quickly learned that he was approachable and kind. He loved going to NFL meetings, especially when his contemporaries were still alive. Until 7 or 8 years ago, when he was no longer able to travel, he never missed a single league meeting or any of our games dating back to 1960. He continued to watch every single game on television until he died. There are so many players and staff that he had a relationship throughout the decades. He cherished those moments when he saw them. It was clear. They felt similar about him based on the visits and inquiries to us over the last couple of years. The outpouring of support from Cardinals alumni and former staff, as well as the community, is absolutely heartwarming. Ron Wolfley, the fullback you just heard from, was a favorite for him to tease, which was a sign of his affection. Whenever he got the chance to tell a story about Ron, it was usually this one. When you needed a yard, Ron would get you 2 yards. When you needed to get 2 yards, Ron would pound it out and get you those 2 yards. And when you desperately needed 3 yards, Ron would get you 2 yards. My dad could have been alone at home, but 2 years ago, my sister moved into my parents' house with her boys and James. She knew Dad needed family around him 24 hours a day. He needed one of us working closely with his medical team at this phase of his life. He wanted to keep living life. The effects of his illness had taken away his ability to speak, but not his ability to enjoy life. He loved running errands with her and as a healthcare assistant. From being a part of the commotion in the kitchen as meals were prepared, to being welcomed to Nicole's book club, he continued to enjoy life. Nicole, Charles, and James, I want to thank you. You made the last years of his life happy, fulfilling, and as healthy as they could be. I also want to offer special thanks to his medical team. Cardinals team doctors Wayne Kuhl, Gary Wazlewski, Curtis Maynard, and Banner Health's Pierre Theriault, plus every one of the 24 healthcare people who carried up the gifts today, who worked with him day to day at home over the years. Those men and women came to love him. His great qualities continued to shine through despite his very limited abilities to communicate. He couldn't tell jokes any longer, but he found ways to make everyone laugh. He fought his illness with grace and strength without ever a hint of anger or self-pity. Dad was married to our mother for 56 years until she passed away 3 years ago. He had 5 kids, 10 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. It seems fitting that he died on the Feast of the Guardian Angels. That was the day he died. His firm imprint on the culture of the Cardinals and our family will carry on. He was kind, generous, and loyal, all qualities the world could use more of today. Rest in peace, Dad. I will miss you.
Good morning. I'm privileged to be here today to say a few words about Bill Bidwill and a life well lived. Being in this beautiful church, filled with the people whose lives he touched in his 88 years, says a lot about everything that was important to him. His family, which has carried on his work with the same grace Mr. B demonstrated throughout his life. His faith, which was part of everything he did. And of course, football, his beloved Cardinals, and the NFL. Bill and his family have been part of the NFL for nearly 9 decades, an extraordinary tenure and one that we honor as we celebrate our 100th season. He would have loved having everyone gathered here today, although he would probably be embarrassed that we were here just for him. He never sought the spotlight. Instead, he carried himself with a calm dignity and an abiding commitment to do what is best for his family, his community, his players, and the game. Mr. B's focus was always on others. I never saw that more clearly demonstrated than on September 11th, 2001, when he was in New York for NFL committee meetings. The Twin Towers had fallen, the city was literally shut down, and nobody knew what would happen next. Bill stayed in our offices, speaking to our staff with a personal touch that comforted many aching hearts. No long speeches, just a reassuring confidence that we would overcome this challenge. Bill's family purchased the Cardinals when he was barely a newborn. He started as a ball boy for the team when he was a child. After proudly serving in the Navy, he later took on a full-time role with the team in 1960. The Bidwills also remember 1960 as the year Bill married Nancy, with whom he raised a wonderful family, which he regarded as his most significant legacy. At the NFL, Bill served as a bridge linking the earliest days of the league with its bright future. He served on a total of 9 different league committees over the years. Throughout that time, his message was simple and consistent: league first. He knew that a strong and unified league is good for every club. His focus was always on working together for the good of the game. Throughout my time at the NFL, I never saw him put himself or his club ahead of what was best for the league and their long-term interest. Mr. B's quiet determination made it possible for the Cardinals to establish themselves in Arizona, build a fantastic stadium, and host 3 Super Bowls, with a 4th in just a few years. In fact, since the Super Bowl was played in Arizona in 1996, only Miami and New Orleans have hosted as many Super Bowls as the Cardinals, a testament to the great respect the Bills' fellow owners have for him. Mr. B understood the importance of family ownership, and I know how proud he was of you, Michael, and the way that you have led the club and served as an influential voice of reason within the league. I also know how proud he was when his Cardinals won the NFC Championship and played in Super Bowl 43. I remember standing on the field in Tampa before the game with Bill, who was beaming with that twinkle in his eyes we all love so much. And of course, he was wearing his trademark bow tie that many of us are wearing today in tribute of him. While wins and losses were important to him, Mr. B used the platform of the NFL and his team to make the world a better place. He was a leader in embracing diversity. He recognized that talent was not bound by race, gender, or age. He knew that because he saw his mother serve as the first female owner of a sports team. And under her ownership, the Cardinals won an NFL championship. Mr. B didn't just talk about diversity as a distant ideal. He acted to make it so. The Cardinals employed the first African-American female executive in the NFL, and the first NFL team to have an African-American head coach and general manager at the same time. Embracing diversity and looking out for others were just some of the values he lived every day as part of his deep faith, which was recognized in 2010 when he was inducted into the Sports Faith Hall of Fame in Lake Forest, Illinois. As Patrick McCaskey, the grandson of George Hallis and chairman of the Hall's advisory group, said, Bill was honored, quote, for his contributions to charity, which he has conducted in a very quiet, very generous manner. By the way, Virginia McCaskey and her family are traveled here all the way from their game in London on Sunday to be here to pay tribute to the Bidwill family and being lifelong friends with Bill. A great thing between 2 wonderful families. I read in the Arizona Republic feature last week that it is a fitting tribute to Bill's life. In the mid-1990s, he was approached by Sister Martha Carpenter, who we met a few minutes ago, the principal of St. Peter Indian Mission School, about 30 miles south of Phoenix. The roof of the school and the convent was in desperate need of repair. She recalled the rain literally poured down on her and the other nuns one night while they were watching TV. It is not reported whether they were watching the Cardinals, but Sister Martha, my belief in you tells me that was true also. She had met Mr. B once, and he told her, call me if you need anything. She said later, boy, did he live to regret that. She called him, and just a few days later, he drove out to the mission alone and handed her an envelope of checks from himself and others. She cried and told him that it was too much money. But Mr. B said, "Look at this place. It's falling apart. It might not be enough, and if it's not, call me." She did call him often, and Mr. B, who had a tremendous sense of humor, would jokingly check for his wallet every time they saw each other. But he was always there for her and for her students. This was classic Bill Bidwill. No cameras, no recognition. He just did it because it was the right thing to do. Sister Martha told the writer that she was reluctant to tell the story. She said, "Mr. Bidwill probably won't be too happy with me talking so much about the way he is. He's one of those people, which is rare these days, who believes in good for goodness sake. That's his secret. He doesn't ask for anything in return." And Sister Martha, you were right. Bill left us all with more than we could ever give him. Mr. B, I know that I speak for everyone when I say thank you for your contributions to our league and for all you did for us along the way. You lived the values that have carried the NFL through its first century, values of sportsmanship, putting the game and players first, and of serving your community because it's the right thing to do. We will all miss you greatly, but you left a path for all of us to follow. We will always remember you and strive to carry on your legacy of a life well lived.